is because if you see growth, then it's like, okay, well, how? What tools do you use? What levers do you pull to grow?
Do hard things.
Doing hard things is a massive lever on the road to growth because, again, challenge is the stimulus for growth.
That's it. We're done for it.
I mean, honestly, probably doesn't even matter what we talk about because it's like there's only one person watching this, and it's our mom.
Hi, Mom.
Hi, Mom. So yeah. Anyway, I don't know. I feel like it's going to be pertinent to just understand some of the fundamental principles like that we think exist anyway, and that are like important in terms of like if you're going to be a quote unquote Renaissance man, or if you're going to go on a venture to really do anything.
Mm-hmm.
Like, there's certain tools you need to acquire along the way to help move you forward in that process.
100%. It's like tools are your skills. Tools are the levers that you apply. Tools are everything. Like, you can't do anything really on your own. Everyone uses tools. Like, humanity, either physically or metaphorically, has always used tools to get ahead.
That's, I feel like, how we... Like, that's what differentiates us from other animals, because like in the animal kingdom, like, dude, we are soft.
We're so lame.
Like, we don't have cool claws, we don't have big teeth, we can't really run that fast, can't jump very high. Like, we're not very like predatorial.
We can't sit out in the sun too long.
Yeah, we're just crispy.
We're crispy.
And so the way that our brain evolved, like, this is the only thing keeping us alive, straight up. And then our ability to figure out how to use tools to leverage our abilities and our skills to multiply
output.
The lameness of ourselves to become less lame.
Yeah, multiply the outputs. That's really all the leverage point is. But yeah, man, humans, it's like we can kind of run further than most things sometimes, and we can throw better than like a horse, and like that's about it.
Facts. That we can run fast enough for a shorter distance of time.
And then run farther, so we just tire out things.
We can trek for days.
We can trek and then we can throw things, and that's about it.
Yeah, just throw stuff. But using like the tools, like it leverages, and so the idea of like a lever is huge.
Give me a lever long enough, and I can move the world.
Big brain.
Huge brain.
And I mean, I guess so. Anyone who like works on a car, has ever worked on a car, like totally understands this, because like, if there's a bolt that's super stuck and you have like a ratchet and you just can't undo the bolt, like the quick fix is take a pipe, stick it on the end of the wrench so your lever is longer, so you push down on the end of the pipe, and now your force gets multiplied by the length of that lever, and so the amount of force that's being experienced by the bolt is a lot more, and so now the bolt will turn.
Pretty much. I mean, that's just from a physical perspective of just torque and multiplying. Yeah, right. You're like just applying force in a particular way to multiply the effective output on something. And that's really just like, in terms of just like a physics lever. But like, fundamentally, anything that multiplies your output. I put in one unit of input, and I get out more than one of output. That is a lever. I mean, anything, actually any input-output. Input-to-output machine is basically a lever. You could consider it as such. But you don't really want to use the term leverage until it's at least like meaningful, like 2, 3, 4, 5x, right?
Yeah.
That's kind of where it starts to get relevant, I'd say.
Right. Because I guess if you're going to do something and then use a tool and it only like gives you a tiny bit more benefit, then the tool isn't super useful.
Well, but the thing is those things do exist. As in, like, there are actual things, physical levers and metaphorical levers and activities you can do that will actually give you less output than the value of what you put.
It's like a negative
inside.
Lever.
Absolutely. Like, you put in 1 unit and you get out half a unit. What goes to the rest? Like, entropy, heat, just wasted time, money, effort. Like, there are absolutely things that do that. And then from a physics perspective, like, you have all the different classes of levers, right? Like a class 1 lever is your standard teeter-totter, like a seesaw kind of thing. Class 2, and all you're just doing is moving around the where your fulcrum point is relative to your load, right? That's really just the thing. So class 1 lever, it's just in the middle. Class 2 lever, it's all the way to one side, and your load's in the middle between your input force and your load, like a wheelbarrow. It's class 2 lever. It's kind of this
Right.
typical example. And then like a class 3 lever, that's the kind of the inefficient one, quote unquote, where you're actually putting your load on the very end, your input force in the middle, and then your fulcrum on the other side, like your arm, where your bicep attaches to your forearm bone, you know, in front of the elbow joint. That's like a class 3 lever. So it's not like maximizing or in any way giving an additional mechanical efficiency to the inputs, but it works.
Right.
So it's just kind of considering, like, if you want to extend that kind of metaphor outwards to other things, like, well, what's useful, what's effective, what gets the job done in real life, while also considering how to optimize for greater outputs based on one input. It's kind of an efficiency metric as well.
Totally. So I guess, like, as you're going forward in learning something or a pursuit of any kind, like the skills that you gain are like the tools that you would use to accomplish something, and you want to try to obtain higher and higher leverage skills as you go. And so, like, a skill that, like, you learn early on in your life is like how to write, like, the alphabet, right? Just what are the letters?
Mm-hmm.
First of all, what are the letters? A, B, C, D. You get good at that. Your mom gives you a little gold star. You're chilling as a kid, right? But then after that, you've learned that skill of what are the letters, but then you learn how to put letters together to make a word that conveys meaning, right? Like apple. I want an apple. Mm-hmm. As a little child, you're like, milk. I want milk, right? But that conveys to the parents, like, oh, this is what you want. Then you have so that's a higher leverage skill than just knowing what the letters are, right? It's being able to put them together.
Meaning.
And then after that, you start to learn how to put words together to create sentences to convey more meaning. And that's just a higher and higher leverage skill, because your input of speech or writing becomes leveraged more because you can convey more meaning with the same sort of input of,
so
I'm going to write something.
What would be the zenith of that skill? Like, what is the highest leverage peak of writing, you'd say?
I'm not really sure, because as you go on in, like, if you take English classes, you go for days and you start to learn, you widen your vocabulary so that you can use words that are maybe more accurate to convey meaning more accurately. Because, like, if you're trying to say something like, I want to exercise, like, I'm going to try to exercise. Okay, what does that mean? Like, what type of exercise? But if you have a vocabulary of, like, I want to do strength training or running or jumping or whatever else.
More nuance.
You can communicate more nuance and detail the wider your vocabulary is, and then the way you compose, like, the structure of a sentence and things like that, you start to convey meaning more clearly and more easily for people. But then I think you get to a certain point where you have so much complexity that you can use that it almost gets too complex to convey meaning clearly. So you almost, the better you get at it, you start to consolidate, and it becomes actually a little bit simpler because you pick less words, but you pick them more precisely.
Words, yeah.
And then that conveys more meaning, but more concisely. And so that, to me, is like the epitome of language.
That's a good point, because that's like a definition of a high leveraged input to output. Like, you're writing less words, but you're getting more information across.
Yeah,
like 100%. Fundamentally more information.
And I think that applies really with any skill set or any job you're going to have, anything, is that the more you start to master it, the more complex you can make something. And then you get to that next level of, if you really master something, you can actually simplify it down so more people can understand it better without losing the nuance.
Right. And that is related a lot to this topic in the sciences and the physical sciences called, like, abstraction. I mean, a lot of, like, computers, it's a word in computer science as well, sure. But it's this idea of you end up with these fundamental principles from which you can derive the extent of the knowledge base, but everything that is given that is fundamental is these few, like, 2 to 3 little principles, right? And then those are everything you need. Everything else in the knowledge base is just a consequence of that. As in, if you make these assumptions and know these things, and this is all you need, everything else is a mathematical and logical consequence, right? And so that's a very high leverage thing. Like, the example I'm thinking of is like Maxwell's equations for electromagnetism, right? There's four of them, right? And you end up, and it's based on these certain assumptions, like how does the magnetic field relate to the electric field and charge and this and that and things like that. I'm not going to get into those right now, but the idea is from those four equations, by direct consequence, just by mathematical like processes that are just pretty much logic anyway.
Yeah.
You end up with the entirety of useful electromagnetism that your phone works off of, your TV works off of, everything like that works off of these fundamental four principles.
Well, right? It's kind of like the 80-20 rule in a way, right? Where 20% of the things will get you 80% of the results. And, I guess to the point of there are big rocks and there are pebbles.
But they're both rocks, though.
Yes, they're both rocks. But let's say if you're driving down a road and there's like a rock slide in front of you, there's a bunch of big rocks and then there's a bunch of smaller pebbles in your way, and you got to try to keep driving. Like, what are you going to move first?
True.
The big rocks. And
I think a more accurate analogy for, like, I guess what I'm trying to talk about is the pebbles come from the rock. Like, they're just little consequences, like little pieces that fall off the rock, but they're not the core rock itself.
Yeah, that's fair.
So, like, everything is a consequence of the fundamentals, right? And that's really where you end up with these high leverage principles and these abstractions and whatnot.
And I guess the way that I conceptualize that is through like big rocks and small pebbles. Is like the big rocks are the fundamentals that if you can get those things down and really be good at moving the big rocks out of the way,
you'll make progress.
You will make progress 100%. Because you can still drive over the little pebbles and it's not going to be a big deal. Obviously, if you move the pebbles out of the way as well, it's going to be a much smoother drive. It's going to be an easier drive, but you're not going to keep driving unless you move the big rocks. So you got to move the big rocks first, because then it's at least possible for you to make progress.
The necessary sequence. Right. And exactly, kind of going back to the alphabet examples, like the big rocks are the alphabets, the words, and things like that.
Yeah.
And eventually, as you go on, like I actually think the highest leverage state of writing would be actually when you start leveraging it with other skills as well, and there's an overlap there, right? So the highest impact, highest leverage form of writing that I can think of would be when I am using my words to put an idea that's in my head and convince you that idea is right. Right? So there's an element of communication, persuasion, depending on the medium in which you're consuming that. There's technology involved, right? Like spoken word versus text versus a phone call versus Twitter. Like, there's a lot of different layers that go into not just what I'm doing, but how I'm using it. And this is where, like, I think the leverage gets multiplied, because you're putting like levers on levers, is when you're positioning your skills in the right way, right? Because let's just say, like, I can make a phone call, right? And I can maybe, try to make something happen. Either I'm calling this person or that person and trying to, like, get them to do something, right? I can maybe get one or two or three people to do something, right? So I can leverage and multiply my output, me making a phone call and then getting a few people to do something. Let's look at Elon Musk or Jeff Bezos. They make the same phone call. They probably say the same words. Nothing about their action in that immediate moment is much different from mine, but they can galvanize and mobilize thousands, hundreds of thousands of people. Right? Because of the position they put themselves in, both on, like, in terms of, like, public eye track record, also just within a company, within a structure, relationships with other people. They put themselves in a position to where they can actually hold that lever in a meaningful way, right? And it's all kind of loops back to the physics, right? Like, mechanic on a wrench. It's just the positioning of where you're applying your force.
Yeah.
Right? It's are you far away from the fulcrum point or the little pivot point you're trying to, like the nut you're trying to crack? Or are you really close to it? So there's a force multiplier, a torque multiplier. And it gets really interesting when you start overlapping different skills and different tools. You can actually end up multiplying on top of multiples, and you get like an exponential leveraging effect that even goes kind of beyond just a normal, like, torque multiplier, which is crazy to think about just with the current state of the world today. There's so many examples of that.
No, I totally agree. And I mean, kind of going back a little bit to the thing about nuance and having some of the higher leverage skills with like language that you were talking about, and being able to convey nuance but keeping it simple and things like that. Like I feel like another really high leverage skill is not just being able to talk about nuance and understand nuance, because so many people, I think, hide behind complexity to cover up a deficiency in really fully understanding applicability of things. Whereas, they'll just throw out like a bunch of nuance and a bunch of random, really, really complex things that no one actually really understands what they're saying. So they sound really smart.
I think people do that unintentionally sometimes as well. But
100%,
yeah.
100%.
Are you aware of the Dunning-Kruger effect?
Yes.
Right, for sure. So we should probably explain that.
Do it.
So the idea of the Dunning-Kruger effect is that your perceived knowledge versus actual knowledge, like there's this little graph for our listeners, I suppose, that on one axis, like the y-axis would be your perceived knowledge, right? And then on the bottom, the x-axis would be like a measure of your experience or your actual knowledge, like something tangible, right? So in the beginning, you obviously start at 0 when you're learning something new, but as time moves on, as your experience moves on, as you start getting more skills, you start learning a lot, your perceived knowledge spikes way up. Like very early on, you think you're the master. Just like you think you know everything. And this pattern is consistent around like just life with adolescence and how that kind of, the navigation of the world and gaining wisdom just overall. And then also just in learning any topic. Like you think you know stuff because you're making a lot of progress, stuff is connecting, oh, you're getting a lot of stuff done, you think you have a ton of knowledge. But realistically, your actual experience and knowledge is very little, right? And then as you kind of start to realize this, then you think you're trash. You don't know anything because you start to have perspective on the scope of the things you're talking about. And now you think, shoot, I don't know anything. I was an idiot back then. You get kind of demoralized. It's kind of this like peak and trough effect where the higher you go, the further you fall. So you end up sitting in this valley for a little while, even though you are actually knowing more and having more experience. You're actually pretty good at the thing. You don't think you are. Your perceived knowledge is very low. Then only after time it slowly starts to build up and up and up as you just start to grow more and actually embody and just fill into your role. And really just start to accept your experience and skill. And so you end up you eventually end up knowing that you know a lot, but you have to go through this pattern in a long process usually in order to really get there confidently.
Yeah. You know some stuff and then think you know everything, and then you go along and you realize you know how much you don't know. Like you know how much there is to learn and how much relative to that you don't actually know. And it creates this deficit, and then you start to fill that in with experience over time, and you build true mastery of something. And I think,
well, that was a perfect example of what we just talked about.
Yeah,
in
100%.
Terms of, I had a very long explanation. Daniel had a very short explanation because he's like, hey, this is just how it is.
Yeah, 100%.
So who's really the master of language here?
But I think people on that, when they start to get up to that initial peak of like they start to learn some stuff and then like I know everything, that's maybe when they start to really go into nuance because they've learned some complex stuff, and so they start to regurgitate complexity. And when you start to go the other direction and you start to gain more experience, you start to gain like real understanding of the actual nuance and how it actually can apply to things, then you start to be able to simplify it down, like you said, and maintain the integrity of the concept, but in a simpler, more digestible way. And I think the ability to zoom in and zoom out is
dynamicism of that
unbelievably impactful, because you can zoom in and go deep into like nuance when you need to, but then you can also zoom back out and see the bigger picture for what it is.
Micro and macro focus.
Exactly, and not lose sight of that. So being able to toggle back and forth between that in anything, in any skill, is huge. You got to be able to go in, look at the micro, and because there's going to be times when you need to dive a little deeper into one part of the problem to be able to fix it and solve it. But then a lot of other times you need to zoom out and look at the bigger picture and not hyper-focus too much on one thing so that you can actually move the needle forward across the board and like actually move the bigger picture
just
forward.
like make the little micro adjustments for sure. Yeah, it's weird because you probably need to make the micro adjustments on the macro, but the major adjustments come when you go zooming in. Maybe not sometimes.
Sometimes,
Kind of interesting to
yeah, and I do think also when you start to learn a bunch of nuance, that's what you start to focus on in application too. Like I come from a fitness background, right? And so like if you're like a personal trainer or a physical therapist or something like that, you know, let's say somebody comes in with like my knee hurts, right? And
cool.
You just learned about some sort of like really complex biomechanics of like the knee and how it moves and how like some hip internal rotation thing affects the knee joint and like stuff like that. And so that's immediately what you go to, like your knee hurts. Oh, I have this really complex answer for your problem. That's what I'm going to try, right? I'm going to get this complex answer and go really deep, zoom way in and on that knee, and that's it. As opposed to if you're able to zoom out a little bit, look at the person as a whole, you find out that they're chronically under-recovered, they're working all the time, they're super stressed, they're generally really not that strong because they never really work out. Things like that, their nutrition is trash. And if you were able to move some of those bigger rocks first, a lot of the times you'll see that they're going to make progress as a collateral of that, right? If the big rocks don't work, if the general obvious glaring problem is not the solution, which it usually is, but if it's not, then you got to be able to zoom in, go a little more nuanced to that individual person and see what's going on, right? But the ability to zoom in when you need to and zoom back out when you need to and not get stuck in one or the other, that's such a high leverage skill, I think.
Just the, like you know what's wrong with the knee, but you might not know what caused that problem, right? And if you fix the knee on the micro, well, who's to say they're not just going to be back in a month with the same problem because you never actually moved the root cause big boulders, which might be good for business. Who knows?
For sure. Repeat customers, for sure. Chiropractors. Just kidding. There's some very excellent chiropractors out there. Don't get me wrong. Trust me. They're awesome.
Do you know, I think we talked about this before. Do you know about the midwit meme?
Midwit meme?
The midwit meme. This is like my favorite meme right now because it's kind of like an extension, not really an extension of the Dunning-Kruger curve, but it's very relevant for what we're talking about.
Yeah.
So the idea with this one, we're making more graphs over the air. We're doing it live. We need a whiteboard.
We're using our words.
We're using our words. Yes, of course. But see, a whiteboard would be the tool that can convey this concept like that.
We'll put something up on YouTube immediate.
No, we won't. You know we won't. We might. Who knows? Okay.
Midwit meme.
Yes, this is great. So it's based on let's say just like a standard IQ bell curve, right? So like you have like a few people who are like just stupid, like low IQ, unga bunga brain, right? And then you have like most people sit in this middle section where they're sitting probably around like, maybe a little above room temp IQ and down up to like maybe like 120 or something like that, right? And then you have the geniuses, like the other upper echelon of the 1% on the other side, right? So this meme is on the one side, the low IQ side, it's this like deformed unga bunga looking dude, basically, right? and on the other side, the high end, you got like this poised Jedi master, who just master of wisdom and knowledge and everything like that. In the middle, you just have like some normal person that's just like crying and cringe and stressed out about everything and things like that. So the idea of the meme, it's not funny if you have to explain it, but here we are. Both of the ends of the spectrum, the Unga Bunga and the Jedi Master, come to the same conclusion of just the simple, obvious, laughably stupid answer, but that's the right answer. And everyone in the middle is like, no, you can't just do that. You have to like think about the complexities of this and that and things like that. But you don't sometimes, right? Because at the end of the day, it's like you have to ask yourself again, like, what's useful? Like, do you want to just, do you have to know all the ins and outs of what you're doing in order to make the right choice? Sometimes yes, sometimes no. Obviously, you want to aspire to be the Jedi Master, but sometimes it's like worse to be just smart enough to know that there's something going on, but not smart enough to know that really what is going on. Sometimes it's better to just like, well, let me just be like
Yeah.
Stupid low IQ, right?
I guess
Because you end up in the same conclusion, the same outcome, the same result, right? And sorry to cut you off, but
no, yeah.
this is pretty relevant too. I just listened to a podcast with Mr. Beast and Lex Friedman. That was actually a super interesting interview.
Fire.
You don't think it would be, but it's like they're actually more similar than you might think, just in terms of the kinds of like freaks they are. I love that. You know, like they're super obsessed about what they do and they make it happen. So one of the main things that stood out for me was Lex is he's asking him all these questions about like, well, what's the process? How do you think about the thumbnails? What about camera angles? This metric, that metric, kind of getting in all the complexities. And then Mr. Beast, his name is Jimmy. He just ends up. I know it's great. His name is Jimmy.
It's just Jimmy.
Jimmy. His response just kind of comes to like, well, yeah, I've thought about all that before, but every time I go through that process, I end up with the same conclusion of, oh, I just have to make better videos. I just make great videos. So that's what I focus on. So he's already kind of gone through the thought process and knows the pattern that every time it just comes back to this simple thing of, oh, you just got to make better videos.
Totally.
And then it saves you so much of your decision fatigue and mental capacity thinking about all the different variables where you're just like, no, just do the one thing.
That's it. Because that's the highest leverage thing that you can do on your time and your energy.
100%. And the whole thing is on a spectrum too, kind of just looping it back. Like you have the spectrum of like low IQ to high IQ where you fit in the middle. But if you kind of go far enough in either direction towards the ends, they really end up at the same place. It's like a circle spectrum, right? So it's like yes, you might get to the same conclusion by really understanding, being a master of it, knowing why those are the right levers to pull, those are the right boulders to move, or you just kind of be like, oh, there's a big rock, I got to move it, and like that's it.
Yeah.
Like, you know, we could have just started with that.
Totally.
And just be like, hey, big rock, move out way because car no go. And then you pretty much end up in the same exact thing.
Same
that took us
outcome.
like 20, 30 minutes to explain right now.
Totally.
So it just kind of depends on like what's useful and trying to manage like, well, sometimes that stupid obvious solution is actually the right one.
Totally. I mean, that still applies to the knee example, right? It's like if somebody's knee hurts and super simple, like fresh off the boat personal trainer is going to come in and be like, let's just get you stronger. Because the stronger your knee is, it won't hurt, right?
Yeah, you don't know what other levers to pull, and that's just the one thing you know you can do.
Exactly. So they're just going to get you generally stronger, right? You start to learn a little bit about like biomechanics and how pain is really nuanced and all these crazy things about the brain and how it influences things, right? And then you're like, oh, well, getting stronger can't be the right answer, so I'm going to do all these crazy interventions to try to
there's
get
some
you
secret sauce.
There's a secret sauce that you're looking for, right? And then you start to realize that as you start to get even more experience that maybe, yes, those things do matter, but how much do they matter? What's the highest leverage thing? If this person isn't generally very strong, that's where I'm going to start. Let's get them strong first. And then I can go into the nuance if it doesn't work. But you end up at the same place as that intro boy of just get stronger.
I think that's why like beginner's luck, quote unquote, is a thing really. Is like you don't know what you don't know. You don't know how to not do just what you've been taught. And usually what you've been taught when you're starting a new skill or a new job or new adventure or whatever, what you're taught is usually taught to you for a reason by someone who has reached the master point.
Right.
Where they're now just letting you know like, hey, this is just the 80-20. This is actually how you get good at the thing. So you just do that and then you end up with results.
Yeah.
But the more you kind of know and understand, there's a period you do have to go through where you might actually fall off a little bit and kind of go through that Dunning-Kruger valley a little bit, just in terms of results you get before you end up going back up again.
Totally. And dude, you want to talk about a high leverage thing?
We want to talk about high leverage things.
Learning from somebody who's already done the thing. Like have a mentor.
Huge.
Right?
Huge.
Because they've already made all the mistakes.
You want to know another high leverage thing on
and
top
so,
of that?
What?
Having a rival.
Okay, hold on to that for a second.
I will hold.
Right? Having a mentor, having somebody that's already gone through what you're going through, they are already where you want to get to. They've made a lot of the mistakes already. So you're just expediting your trial and error process. You're outsourcing your trial and error to somebody else.
So you're no longer, and this is why like I'm a big proponent of like paying for education and mentorship and things like that, because if I can spend money so I don't have to make mistakes and get back time, it makes so much sense, right? It's like Alex Hormozy always says this, like you're going to pay for the knowledge one way or another. You're just going to pay in money or you're going to pay in time, right? And anything that gets me there faster is always worth it in my mind. You're just paying down the time tax of ignorance.
For sure.
I love that little stuff. Paying down the time tax of ignorance.
And because ultimately, again, like the only two levers that at the end of the day we have to pull are energy and time. right? How you leverage those two things, the combination of those two things, is what gets you the outcome. Now, obviously, there's a lot of different levers that you can pull within those.
But those are the fundamentals.
Energy and time are the only two resources that you have, and so how you spend those matters. 100%. So, rivals.
Rivals, yes. Simon Sinek talks about the idea of a worthy rival, I think in his book. Either Start With Why, or I think it's actually The Infinite Game. One of those two books. When he's talking about certain like specific companies or individuals that manage to stand out and become great within their game, and just like this is the perspective they have on what they're doing and why they're doing it and how that kind of fits, and that's what the book's all about. But the idea of a rival and how that will also supercharge and leverage your outputs, right? Because sometimes we find ourselves in an echo chamber, either of mediocrity with the people we're around, or just sometimes alone. Like it's this weird dynamic when like sometimes you when you're leveling up, but your circle you're around is not leveling up. You might have to leave that for a short period of time, but then you find yourself alone, right? Which might be better, but also is not a very good spot to be in, right? Because now you don't have things and people to leverage off of all the time. So having yourself a mentor is fantastic. That's kind of like your guiding North Star in a way. Yeah. And having a rival is like your rocket fuel, right?
Sure.
Having that extra accountability and someone that's going along the journey with you, that you can help each other, push each other, compete with each other, will always kind of give you a little bit of an edge to just push you that extra little thing. Because like, we can use like a gym example, right? Like if someone is, boom, you're both trying to like get big, get stronger. You're both going for like, let's say a bench press of like 225 or something like that. Maybe you're both sitting around like 200 or something, and now your rival benches at 225. You look at that and be like, oh shoot, now I got to do it. I don't want to get left behind. It's a little bit of fear sometimes of being left behind, but also a motivator and a pusher to just see what's possible with someone who's going through the journey with you. Because you want to see what's possible from a mentor, but you also want someone alongside you along that journey to kind of push each other and show each other what's possible at each step of the way.
Yeah. No, 100%. Like just real-time motivation that's going to help push you.
Accountability, too, is huge with that.
Yeah.
Knowing that someone's going to be there and you can't let yourself down or them down. Because sometimes, it's pretty hard to let yourself down if you really dig deep with yourself, I think. Mm-hmm. But it's easy to do that on a day-to-day basis sometimes. It's too easy. Yeah. Because you're like, oh, I'll just do it tomorrow, whatever. You end up letting yourself down all the time. Letting someone else down, there's a little bit of societal pressure and kind of monkey brain kicks into tribal gear, mm-hmm. where it's like, if I let a tribe member down, the tribe won't like me, I'll get kicked out and I'll die, right? So it kind of kicks into gear a little bit there with external accountability, and that's just something that can be super useful and leveraged when it's done properly, right?
Totally.
You want to be careful with both who you choose as your mentors and your rivals, but just the concept of those are two major levels you can pull.
Yeah. I like that. And you mentioned something a second ago about that I kind of want to touch on a little bit about not just like having a lever to pull, but making sure that you're using the lever the right way.
Huge.
And more or less pointing the lever in the right direction, because you can just pull a bunch of levers, but if they're not actually moving you in the direction you want to go, they're not as useful to you. And so an example that I notice, I guess, a lot is like people on social media want to get as many followers as possible.
Why?
Right? Why? Well, because an audience is leverage, right?
Mm-hmm.
Eyes on you is leverage. And it is. It's attention, right? That's leverage. However, just because there's a bunch of eyes on you doesn't necessarily mean anyone's really looking. Now, what I mean by that is, do they really care what you have to say, or are they just looking because you're entertaining or you're doing something cool and it's like whatever?
So that might be the value you're providing.
Maybe.
So just kind of, you do have to be intentional about what you're going
for. But then that in itself becomes the value, and so using your audience as leverage to provide value somewhere else, that's what I'm talking about.
Goes back to alignment.
And so I guess an example of that would be like, here's the other thing, is I think a lot of people use that as like, all I have to do is get a bunch of followers on Instagram and then I'm set, because then all I have to do is sell something for $1 and 1 million people will buy it, and then I make $1 million, right? Hot take.
Yeah.
I don't know. Like, that's not the move because,
Well-
dude. Well, actually, for some people that could be the move, right? Because you're leveraging different
It
things.
depends on what you're selling and why you're selling. Intention is something that humans can sniff out very, very well. If your intention is just to make the money and you built up this audience, I don't even know how you'd be that successful with this intention, but let's just say you built up this audience, and then your intention is just to sell them something. You're gonna end up cutting corners. You're gonna end up finding the first cheap thing that you can sell for $1. Right. And then everyone's gonna be like, "What is this? No, I don't want this. Like, this doesn't make sense.
True.
You're not. That's not even what your content's about. It's out of brand. It's like, bro, what is happening?"
Yeah. Let me rephrase that a little bit. I guess big audience, you sell something for $1 to 1 million people, you make $1 million.
Sure.
Right? Mission accomplished. But at the same time, like, that's kind of trying to figure out how can I offer the least value to the most people. It's like, what? Why? But I guess it depends on, again, the lever you're trying to pull. Why are you trying to do it? It's like, that's a volume game versus, that's a quantity game over a quality game. You don't have to do that, right? To be successful, you don't have to have 1 million followers on Instagram. You can just have a handful, but if they're like devoted followers, you could sell something for $1,000 and they'll probably still buy it, right?
Yeah.
It's kind of like,
yeah.
And I guess to my previous point of just because you have a bunch of eyes on you doesn't necessarily mean anyone's actually watching. Like, if you're trying to sell your car, a lot of people will like park their car on a side of a street or in a parking lot where people will drive by it, right?
A lot of eyeballs.
And they'll come by, they'll see it, they'll
cool.
stop and look at it, and you put your number on it so they can call you and like ask about it and stuff like that, right? But contrast that with if you park the car to sell on the side of a freeway, how many offers do you think you're going to get? Probably 0, right? Because
it's positioning.
But you're going to get thousands of eyes on it, thousands of exposures. However, those people, first of all, they're going too fast to see it. Second of all, they probably can't pull over to actually look at it even if they wanted to, right? And so just because you have a lot of eyes on something doesn't necessarily mean that's actually a high leverage opportunity. You have to leverage it the right way.
It's also about that's 100% just about positioning, basically, right there. Is positioning your offer, let's say, not just in front of the right people, but in front of the people in a way to where it actually does provide value, right? So, like, you're not gonna just, you have to get in front of the right people, like I was saying, but you also have to make sure that you get in front of the people who want to buy a car, right? And so this is like sales tactic, like sales basics 101 with, like, you know, if anyone's ever sell me the pen, you know, kind of thing. Jordan Belfort, that guy. The whole point of that exercise, like, people don't understand what that is, right? So, like, if I were to ask you, like, Daniel, sell me the pen, what are you gonna do? Sell me the coaster. Sell me the coaster, Daniel.
Want a coaster?
I mean, that's
Are you
pretty
looking
much
for
what
a
that is.
coaster?
Yeah, that's exactly what you want to do. He knows this. You want to ask the questions of, like, okay, so, like, how long have you been looking for a coaster? Or how long have you been in the market for a pen? Or whatever you're doing, right? And if they say, well, I'm not, then it's like, why am I here?
Yeah, 100%.
You know? So just be 100%, just because you're in front of someone pitching something, selling something, trying to get people to engage and respond to something, that's the wrong way to do it, because your intention is outcome based for you.
Totally.
You have to be outcome based for them. You have to be, how can I make their life better? How can I provide value? And if your game is, how can I provide $1 of value to 1 billion people? That's a big deal. Like, honestly, that is. Like, people, you might think, oh, it's $1, whatever. But you also have to manage the numbers game of, like, well, how many people really need $1 worth of value depending on where they are in their life? Like, you know, that's kind of a take it or leave it kind of thing. Whereas, you know, you might ask, like, well, how can I provide $1,000 worth of value to 1,000 people? Right? Well, it's a little bit off in terms of the numbers, but same kind of idea is you're providing higher value people, or higher value to the right people, right? And this is why something that's always kept me grounded, just funny saying this when we have 0 followers right now, but it'll make sense in the future. The idea is not to be well known. The idea is to be known well. And as long as you can kind of keep grounding yourself in that,
Facts.
it resets you back into authenticity.
Yes.
And just, well, my audience is not this or that, or it's like my audience is people who love who I do, or love what I do and who I am. And then it's kind of full stop. So it's like, oh, I just be me, and then that's it. That's my audience. That's who I target. That's who I quote unquote sell to.
Yep.
That's who I can provide value to, because I'm providing value to myself, and other people resonate with that, so that I can then show them how I did it.
You're just making sure that the levers you're pulling are aligned what you actually want to make happen and for the people you want to make it happen for, as opposed to just see lever, pull lever. Like, you're going to waste a lot of time and energy pulling random levers that do not move you in the right direction.
Too many levers, too many doors, can't walk through all of them.
Right.
Got to be selective.
So
it's hard, though.
Pulling the levers that really make a difference, I guess.
It's hard to know as well. And it's something that you kind of have to just grow into with sometimes experience, sometimes through pain, sometimes through insight. There's many avenues for growth, but it's something that you really just have to embrace within the journey, and be clear on where you're going.
Totally. And I think too, like, it's not just necessarily knowing about which levers to pull, which is a big piece of it. And I think you said that, like, that comes a lot with experience, and I think that also comes a lot with knowing what you're trying to accomplish, and like having your priorities in order, having your values in order, about like, okay, why am I actually doing what I'm trying to set out to accomplish? Why am I doing it?
Yeah, and being able to kind of see, like, well, if I poke here, this pops out over here, and push this lever and that goes up, or this happens, or whatever. And kind of being able to see around corners with the inputs that you have, and understanding how that's going to give you the outputs, right? Like, that is a skill on its own.
Yeah. And what lever you pull always comes back to, like, why you're doing it. And that's something that only you can, like, decide for yourself. And then that will become a decision-making filter on what levers you pull. Then I also think there's certain levers that people are, like, afraid to pull because they're hard. Like, this lever is just going to take a little more elbow grease. No matter how many, like, how many pipes you stack on that wrench, you're still going to have to yank on it pretty hard.
Or even maybe you're not able to apply leverage. Maybe it's something that's super worthwhile on the outcome side, but maybe you kind of do just have to put in the grind in order to make it happen.
Yeah,
right? Like, it's
a lever's not magic either. Like, that's a distinction.
It's a tool, and again, the right tool for the right job. And like, you can't really, well, I guess you could, but it's hard to cut down a tree with a hammer.
Yeah,
right. But it's also kind of hard to hit a nail in with a saw.
Yeah, like, you can do it, but it's hard.
It's do it, kind of. Sometimes.
And I think that goes along with too, like, some people will again be on either side of this spectrum where it's like, I'm going to try to just grind my way through this thing, and it's like, that bolt's never coming off. So you got to use some leverage. However, there's a lot of people who's like, I'm going to just use leverage, and then I'm never going to have to try, right?
Yeah.
So it's the like, normal sort of idiom of work harder, not smart, or sorry, work smarter, not harder. Whoa. Right?
We don't work hard over here. We don't do that.
Work smarter, not harder, right? However, work smarter and harder, because you have to be able to know when to toggle back and forth between which one, right?
Well, if you have a high leverage opportunity, you could get the same output by putting in let's say I need an output of 10 units. Make it very generic. And I can either get there through a process where I only have to put in 5 units and I get 10. Or maybe I find a high leverage opportunity, high leverage method, or something like that, and I only put in 1 unit and I get 10 out. Well, why don't I just, but before that I was capable of doing 5 units. So why don't I just, press that lever, pull that lever like 5 times, right?
Yeah.
It's the same input as I was doing before, applied to a high leverage opportunity. Just work hard, like, grind on the high leverage opportunities, and you get even more multiples of output.
Exactly. It's like, people will work smart so they don't have to work hard, but imagine if you worked smart and you worked hard, like, you would be putting this more effort into something that's even already higher leverage, so that extra effort gets extra multiplied, and you're just like next level.
That's the exponential effect.
That's the idea of working smarter and harder. It's like, and not that you always have to do both, but it's knowing when to use a lever to, like, so you don't have to put as much effort, or when that lever is there to actually multiply even more effort. And when you can push harder on that thing, and you'll get even more out of it. So it's the idea of being able to know like the push and pull of when to do each and when to just
the discernment and the judgment.
You know what I mean?
The judgment is very high level skill on its own. And Naval Ravikant he talks a lot about this too, where like eventually is like you want to be at a position where you're paid for your judgment. And that comes with a lot of accountability and responsibility, sure, but that ends up putting you in a position where you're able to make high leverage decisions, where one of your decisions creates a lot of output and you get rewarded very handsomely for it, both financially and just fulfillment wise as well. You're able to do more in the world.
Absolutely. So I think like
it's something you grow into though.
Yeah, definitely. Something like that definitely comes with experience and learning and going through that process a bunch of times so that your judgment is more accurate, right? Because if you're just going to throw ideas out there, like no one's going to pay you for your judgment if your judgment isn't guaranteed to be accurate, or at least likely to be accurate.
And a lot of times reputation requires a track record, or this requires a reputation of track record, which is always kind of the conundrum of like, well, if no one's going to work with you without a track record, how are you going to get a track record? You know, it's like, how is it go? No one hires for jobs because they need a prior experience, but how do you get prior experience if you don't get hired? It's like kind of that weird struggle at the beginning, but reputation is a massive platform to stand up on, and sometimes that lets you reach the higher levers.
Totally. No, absolutely. I think that's pretty important to understand too, because like reputation, like, has an interesting connotation in a lot of ways too, because I think there's a negative connotation a lot of times with like just reputation is often used in a term when you're talking about like a negative reputation with somebody, but also a lot of people do use reputation and like, wow, he's got a really good reputation. And the idea that like your reputation,
just track record, like
exactly, it's track record. And I think that like going back to the point of like judgment, being paid for your judgment and needing that to be at a certain level of accuracy in order to have that be viable, to be like paid for it and people like wanting your judgment, like it needs to be accurate. But that doesn't happen unless you've put in the work and you've gained the experience of pulling different levers, seeing which one works, seeing which ones don't work as well, and dialing that in a little bit.
Yeah, that's kind of, you do kind of have to be, you're just like really good at being low IQ, but you do have to kind of be on the high Jedi Master end on that, because you not only just make the right decisions, but you can also explain to people why it's the right decision, right? Because you understand the mechanic, you can gain the confidence of others trusting your judgment, because you can show them that this is how it's going to work, right?
Yes.
Which you kind of need the Jedi IQ
people,
for that.
People want to just come out the gate and be at that level already.
Which you might make a choice that is the same choice, but the quality of your decision is actually independent of your outcome, right? So like, I don't like to judge decisions based on outcomes, because you can absolutely have a terrible decision, but it makes a good outcome. Sometimes it happens.
Right.
You can also have a fantastically great decision. Like fundamentally, the process, like I use the process, I use my fundamentals, this is the best choice that I could have made at the time, and it still goes sour. Like that happens as well. But how do you judge based on outcomes or process?
Well, the person who you pay for their reputation makes those, I guess, because you said you can just make a bad decision and the right outcome happens. That happens more often when you have more experience. So you're paying for that person's judgment because they're going to get the right outcome more often.
Right.
And this is the way that I think about it, is like, because their judgment is more accurate. And you have to put in the work and the experience to get that, because, right, like accuracy comes from calibration, and calibration comes from iteration. Right? So you have to do the thing, you have to take your shot, see what happens, and then adjust based on that.
Right.
And then over time, you get better and better. So like an example would be, like if you go to a shooting range, right? And everybody on their first shot wants to hit a bullseye, right? They want to just hit the target, right? But that's not how it works.
But
and
you're not going to say that doesn't mean you don't try though.
No. But I guess what I'm trying to say is you might hit the target on your first try, right? It's like a shot in the dark. It's like you might hit it, but do that again,
right?
And again, and again, right? So what you have to do is take a shot, see what happens. Like you miss to the right. Okay, great. Aim a little more to the left. You still miss right. Aim a little more to the left. Now you miss left. Okay, a little back to the right. Now you're on target.
Yeah, you just zero in on that.
So you iterate, you do the thing, you calibrate, you see what happens, and you adjust based on the thing, and then you repeat that process over and over, and that's how you over time build accuracy. Your margin of error becomes less and less and less. So a professional sniper comes to that same range. They still might miss their first shot, but probably not by as much as you. And their second shot, bang on, because they know how to adjust. Their accuracy is way higher and more consistent. So you have to build that, right? Iterate through that. You have to take the time to do the thing. Nobody wants to do the things they don't want to miss, but you got to do the thing and miss so you can actually get better, right? Iterate, calibrate, accurate.
You miss 100% of the shots you don't take.
Oh boy.
I mean, it's true though.
It is true. 100%. Like there's the reason like that type of a quote is like huge is because that's a thing.
100%.
So to be accurate, like, you have to build experience that way. That's the only way to do it. It's like you have to miss to figure out not only did you miss, yes or no, but by how much and in what direction, so you can correct that.
And that's actually super important too, because you have to be able to. It kind of goes back to what we were talking about a little while ago. With you have to be able to kind of detach yourself from the outcome and the judgment of that outcome in order to be in the state to make those adjustments. You know, like let's say I miss either a target on an exam, at a job, whatever. You know, like you miss, you don't get the desired outcome. A lot of times, the desire or the initial reaction puts you in a state of closed offness, avoidance, right? Where it's like you're depressed, you're just like, man, I'm stupid, I suck, it's bad, it's whatever. But you're too outcome based because you're now also focused on like that was a failure, I am a failure. You're identifying with the outcome, right? And then same kind of thing is like if something goes right, maybe you don't know why it goes right, maybe you made a wrong decision, but it turned out right. You now identify with the outcome. I'm the best. I am right. I am correct, right? Where you have to be able to detach from that process entirely to objectively look at like what happened, how did this input get to that output, what part of that mattered more than other parts, kind of be in this analytical perspective is a little bit to be able to extract those lessons and actually make those calibrations and iterations, right? So it's a little bit of this detachment aspect as well, and just being in a state where you're able to even make those adjustments.
That's hard.
It's really, really hard.
That's hard, and like,
but that's how you grow.
That is how you grow.
It's focusing just on how, like, okay, cool. Well, how did I grow from this? What did I learn?
Yeah, 100%. I do think also like with growth, people kind of miss, I guess, the point and the perspective a little bit on like they put their focus on success and achievement and like that's the end goal. But here's the thing. Growth happens on the way to success, not because of it. So it's not the fact that you succeeded that means that's what's going to grow you. It's the fact that you have to grow on the way there, and that's why you succeed, right? It is not the success itself, but it's the obstacles and the challenges you have to overcome, right? Because think about it this way. It's my current self as I am now cannot overcome that obstacle. I do not have the tools and the abilities to overcome that obstacle to reach that success, whatever's in my way, the challenge, right? However, so I have to become a better version of myself. I have to change myself to someone who can then overcome that obstacle and reach that point of success.
100%, yeah.
Right?
Like you have to kind of become the person who has the success before you ever have the success.
Yes, it's not necessarily the success itself. It's you have become someone who can achieve it, right? It's not achievement itself that changes you, but it's who you have to become along the way in order to achieve it that changes you, right? So it's success is the byproduct of a metamorphosis of self.
And here's the thing with metamorphosis, though. It's fundamentally destructive And this is what people kind of have to realize about creation in order to be creative and make something or make something of yourself and make an outcome or whatever. It fundamentally comes in a duality of destruction, right? Like it doesn't even matter. Like if I'm in this state and I move to a successful state, it's like, well, I destroyed my old unsuccessful state.
Sure.
Right? Yeah. So destruction, I think people kind of misconstrue that a little bit, where it's like, oh, of course you have to like destroy something in order to build something on top of it. It's like, no. If you're going to be changed to a new state, any kind of change or growth or anything that happens like that, it fundamentally destroys the old state. And that's constantly happening on a continuous basis, right? Your past is being destroyed for your present, which will be destroyed for your future.
Yeah, totally.
And understanding it like that gives you a little bit, I don't know, at least for me, it gives me a sense of more power and a little bit of like control over how I can manage myself to position myself to create something better in the future by what I destroyed today.
And that's deep. And I think it's almost like also why, at least I think this might be why, people who are at the top of their game, obviously I don't know this from experience because I'm not at the top of anything yet, but it's like people who are at the top of their game, number one, the reason a lot of them don't stay there for very long is because, well, two reasons. One, I think they're scared of that destruction of their current self to have a new self. Losing what they have, there's just too much at stake for them, so they're like, I'm just not going to do that. But also, they get comfortable there.
Yeah, it's like good enough, right?
Right?
Because they set the goal of, I want to be number one, without thinking of, okay, cool, for how long?
Because, dude, if you're comfortable, you're vulnerable. Like, straight up. Like, as soon as you start to get comfortable, you start to get complacent, you start to let off the gas a little bit, and you're also not going to put yourself in positions where you're challenged as much because you don't need to. But what you have to realize is, even if you're top of your game, you have to consistently grow to stay there.
And this is why you have to detach from the outcome, because if you're attached to the outcome and your identity is being number one, once you've reached it, who are you anymore? You've realized yourself and that's it. There's no need to grow anymore. There's no need to become anything else. But then that leaves you open, like you said, right? And this is also why, like, the idea of arrival along that journey is also pretty helpful, is because you're never going to be in the state without a little bit of fear of someone taking it over from you, because you have your rival right next to you.
Exactly.
So it's always going to push you both.
That's going to push you, because challenge is the stimulus for growth.
Like 100%. And a lot of people, they have this notion of like pain and suffering is bad, right?
Yeah.
With, because that's oftentimes what's required for growth. Like, it's not always, like, I don't think, a lot of people will say like pain is required for growth, and that's the only way you'll grow is if you suffer. It's like, well, like, no, that doesn't quite make sense. I think there's a little more nuance to it than that. But if you have the right perspective, you will grow from any situation because you are open to learning the lessons. And the cool thing is okay, now you just continually get better whether or not something goes right or wrong, right? And then with the idea, but people struggle with pain obviously because it's uncomfortable, right? And they want to avoid that.
Yes.
But and this is actually a kind of a Buddhist ideal, because that's kind of a core tenet of Buddhism, is like, life is suffering, get over it, kid. Like, it's like, okay, all right. But it's this idea of, and people kind of stop at the surface level of like, oh, just accept it. Just accept the suffering. It's like, well, that's not helpful for most people. It's like,
right.
I guess if you kind of understand that or just kind of deal with it, it's whatever. But I think it made a lot more sense when I heard this thing of like, well, if you learn how to suffer, you suffer less. If you learn how to suffer, you actually suffer less. So like, what does that mean? I think it means twofold. For one, it's if you view suffering as just, oh, this is just something that happened, what am I going to learn from it? Because now you're attached to the growth instead of the outcome of something. You're no longer concerned with dealing with the suffering. You're too focused on getting better, right? And your brain and being doesn't have the capacity to split itself into doing everything at once. You're intentionally redirecting your trajectory, right? So that's like one thing. It's like, oh, I learned how to suffer by accepting suffering, taking suffering as a lesson and growing from it, right? That alone will mitigate suffering tremendously, right? But then I think it also means you can look at it another way too. You know the story of the buffalo and the cows? Cool. This is good then. So buffaloes and cows. So if you look at like a herd of cows, let's just say out in the wilderness, the plains, Yellowstone, I think that's where the bison are as well, whatever, and they're just sitting there chilling, doing the thing, and a storm comes along, right? They sense the storm coming, they see it coming, oh man, there it goes. What the cows will do is, all as a herd, they'll run away from it, but they're not fast enough to outrun it, right? So the storm ends up catching up to them, and they end up sitting in the storm for sometimes days, right? Because they're going in the same direction, and the storm is just ever so slowly creeping up and passing them by. So they end up sitting with the pain and suffering of the storm by trying to run away from it.
I see.
Right?
Yeah.
Buffaloes, exact opposite. They're the only animal that does this. See a storm coming, they go right into it, head on. Right? They actively seek the discomfort because they know it's inevitable and it's there. And then because they're going in the opposite direction, they end up only spending maybe a day, if even, in that storm, and then they're out on the other side, right? They have learned how to suffer. They have learned to embrace it and seek it out and understand that the quickest way past it is through it. The quickest way over it is through, right? And so that's a pretty heavy example of, or it's a profound example to me of like learning how to suffer. Right?
Yes.
So you kind of add those two elements together, and now you're a master at suffering, and you've achieved enlightenment and nirvana. And yes, of course.
And the bag.
And the bag is secured.
That definitely goes along with the common notion of like failure is the greatest teacher and like all that type of thing, where it's like.
But people stop too soon with that. Like
no, I totally agree.
Goes into it and figure out, okay, like why though? What is it about failure? Why is failure demonized? And yeah.
And I definitely think, like, I mean, maybe hot take, maybe not, because it's kind of a
let's get the hot
trendy
takes.
thing now, but, like, seek failure. Like, straight up. And I'm not saying, like, try to fail. Like, don't try and, like, make sure you fail.
Because, again, you seek the things that will likely result in failure because you're not good enough yet.
Here's the thing. Exactly.
Because that will make you grow.
Exactly. And it's not, because, again, it's not failure for the sake of failure. It's failure for the sake of absorbing the lessons that you're going to learn by failing. It's like put yourself in situations, in situations where it is a real likelihood that you might fail, because it is a little outside your comfort zone, dude. Because if success is certain, like you're just shooting too low. Like you're too in your comfort zone. You got to get outside that a little bit. So seek opportunities where it's like hard enough where you might fail, because you're going to learn a lot more from that.
I think seek failure is a pretty good one, but again, I personally would rather say like seek growth, because it at least for me, it's more aligned with my notion of detachment from outcome.
Yes.
But that being said, it's like, well, the best way to seek growth is by seeking the things which I'm likely to fail, because those are outside of my comfort zone.
That's what I mean by that. Because if you say seek growth, then it's like, okay, well, how? What tools do you use? What levers do you pull to grow?
Do hard things.
Doing hard things is a massive lever on the road to growth, because again, challenge is the stimulus for growth,
and that's also like it can be used as a compass as well for you as well, like figuring out, okay, like, well, what should I do? What do I do? It's like, well, what do you not like doing? What do you hate doing? Well, maybe you should do more of that, because not only is it just beneficial for that, like let's say you're an athlete and you're training for this, and you just like you hate like running, right? It's like, well, do that. You're gonna go run more.
So do you think you should do anything that's hard just for the sake of it being hard?
That is a great question. I think there is some level of value in that because of the mental growth of doing a hard thing, and you will learn how to do hard things, and there's a lot of fundamental lessons you will learn from doing any hard thing that can be applied to every other hard thing, right? Sure. And then so if you just do a hard thing just for the sake of it being hard, you can take those lessons and apply it to the thing you've decided to do that's hard. Right? So like, yes, but that doesn't mean you should always do it, because there are limited factors at play, like limited energy, limited time, limited opportunities. So you do have to be very selective on what you spend time on. But that being said, is if you do choose to make or choose to do a hard thing and it turns out not to be the quote unquote right thing or most optimal thing, it is your choice on whether or not that's a waste. It is up to you and your interpretation of it and what you gain from it and how you decide to pull from that and grow better because of it determines whether or not that was a waste.
Yeah.
A lot of times people be like, oh, I got a degree in the thing I'm not even employed in. Oh, that was a waste. Like, well, yeah, because you think of it that way, right? Mm-hmm. You're not trying to pull the lessons and connect the dots from whatever major you learned in into your new thing. Tons of connections can be made there. Yeah. I guarantee it. And now you can be a unique thought leader in that field because you're bringing in new perspectives. But you're not even trying to do that because you don't obviously see the connection, and now it's a waste.
Yes.
Right? And then also you just learn to do hard things. Do I think there are better hard things you probably could do instead of college if that's just your goal, is you just do hard things? Absolutely. But that just because you did it, you shouldn't regret it. Totally. You should understand how that builds you into who you are and how to optimize to be better for it.
Yeah. I mean, you can learn anything from anyone, anywhere, at any time.
That's
if you are open to it, right? And that is a huge high leverage skill. Like, sometimes you're going to be in situations where you don't necessarily have a say in, this is the hard thing that I get to do. It just happens to you. And it's like, can you still be able to extract the lessons and the value from learning? Mm-hmm. Even if
you're not,
even if it's something that doesn't seem related. Like, that's the whole point of, like, being able to find underlying principles and being like a quote unquote Renaissance man.
This is how
right?
you learn to suffer, because then it becomes fun. Like, let's say you end up stuck in a situation where, like, oh, now you're stuck in, I don't know, like a parent-teacher meeting or something like that, and you're like this big CEO, and you're thinking like, man, this is so dumb. Like, I'm not learning anything. I'm not around people who are better than me. I'm above this, you know. And now it's all these like negative things that are going in, and you're not going to get anything because you're not focused on seeing anything outside of that. Like, your brain is designed to filter information because there's so much going on, it can't process it all. So if you focus on a certain thing, you're going to get that, right? Yes. Your RAS is just going to constantly notice that. But if you, then it can kind of becoming a game at that point. Now it becomes less of suffering because, like, cool, I have to do this lame meeting. Let me try. Let me see. Would it be funny if I just was able to find something in this meeting, or what this teacher does, or what my kid's doing, or this or that, or whatever, that I can then take back to my business and then come at it from a fresh perspective and get a competitive edge because of this meeting? Wouldn't that be fun? Yeah. Wouldn't that be cool? Start to ask yourself those questions, and now you're open to it.
Straight up. Dad used to tell us that all the time.
Did he?
100%. I remember him saying that a lot, of like, you can learn anything from anyone, so even if it seems like something that's completely dumb, make it a game and try to see if there's a lesson in it.
I love that. No, that is really wise.
That's always stuck with me so hardcore, because I do truly believe that. Like, there's always something to learn from something. And so, but I also do think, like, to your point earlier, of there probably might be higher leverage things that you can do.
It's a balance.
Because it's the idea of doing something hard just because it's hard. Yes, you will get value from that. But can you do something hard and get the value from that also moves you towards your goal at the same time?
Well, it's all about intention. Like, what's the goal? You know, because just doing hard things might not be the best thing, right? There is a time where, like, you know, going back to like my phone calls versus Mr. Bezos' phone calls or Mr. Musk's phone calls. Like, I can make 1,000 cold calls and it'll be super hard, and I do the hard thing and I learn a lot from it and I become a better person for it. But what if my goal is actually to, like, make something happen? Then that's probably not the way to do it realistically. Whereas, like, you know, one of them make one phone call. It's not very hard for them, but they make a lot of impact happen because they position themselves in a state of leverage to where that does happen. So yes, doing a hard thing you can always make a hard thing good for you, but that doesn't mean a hard thing is always the best for you. And that doesn't mean you should always seek out a hard thing for the difficulty's sake all the time.
Smarter and harder.
Smarter and harder.
Got to be able to know.
Sometimes at the same time, sometimes one or the other. It's really tough to find that out, and the discernment between when you should seek difficulty for difficulty's sake and when you should seek the quote-unquote easy route. Because there is also a lot of value in, like, well, give a hard job to a lazy man and he'll figure out a better way to do it. Because that better way to do it now can be scaled more.
It's efficiency.
Mm-hmm. It's efficiency. And then that process of being lazy was required to create a scalable, efficient process that you can then scale to impact more people. And then, so it's just about leveraging, or not leveraging, but like deciding and understanding what the goal is, right? And then just doing what is required, right? Because at the end of the day, it's like, I think people get a little too caught up in, like, well, I can do this, I can do that, or I got to do my best, or this best, or I'm not good enough. And it's like, dude, no. Just do what's required. Like, figure out what you want to do, be clear on it, and then just do what's required. make it happen. Sometimes it's kind of like that simple. Like just unga bunga brain this thing. Just do the thing because it's a good thing to do.
Do the thing. 100%.
Yeah.
And the cool thing is too, is like if you end up wanting to take it further than that, you can, because once you then figure out the efficient way to do it, then you can add back in a bunch of effort on top of that, and now you have a huge lever, right? You have the smarter
100%.
and you superimpose the harder onto the smarter.
And you need the cycles of that.
Dude.
You need the cycles of sometimes doing hard things where you're actually like grinding your levers to produce massive output, and then you need sometimes where you kind of take a foot off the gas to kind of be open to more creative solutions.
Yeah.
And that's like kind of your creation and destruction phase and ideation phase where you're trying to figure out, okay, are there any other levers I can pull? What can I do? How can I multiply this? And then you put those systems in place, and then you grind again and apply those and multiply your levers.
That's the iterate, calibrate again, right?
It's the same thing
where it's like you iterate, you're grinding, you're doing the thing, and then you calibrate, you
100%,
make it more
100%.
efficient. And then again, once it's more efficient, you put more juice on it again.
100%.
You go way up with the grind, then you make it more efficient again, and then you put more juice, and then efficient, and then juice, and then you just never end. Like, it's crazy.
So that just reminded me of like this, one of my favorite, like, just goes back to the midwit memes. Like, you have the unga bunga guy and the Jedi guy on the sides. And this guy in the middle, he's saying like no, you have to have a complex reason for what you're doing. What is the point? What is your goal? And like really trying to like overanalyze things like that, where it's like, at the end of the day, it's like, well, if it's good, do it. Sometimes it's that simple. Like figure out what's going to be good for what you want to accomplish, and then just do what's required to do it.
Dude, straight up, like this podcast, like it's something that is cool to us that we wanted to do.
You just got to do it.
So do it.
Yeah, you just got to
right?
do it. Yeah.
Sometimes you don't need a better reason than I want to do this.
100%.
And I think this is going to be good.
That's a great reason. That's an underrated reason. Honestly, people always think they have to have a reason. And even if they don't for themselves, they feel like they have to have it for others because they care too much about what they think other people think.
Yeah.
And so it's like, oh, I want to do this. Or like, oh, why did you decide to do this thing or build this business? Like, oh, I want to help these people. Or I just think that this is the problem. It's like, no. Why did you really try to do it? Because it's freaking cool. Because it's awesome. It's like, I love that.
That's a great reason. And I think you actually just mentioned something that really holds people back from growth too, is not, here's the hot take, is that not, so it's the idea that not doing something because they care what other people think. So it's the common thing is like, stop caring what other people think. But here's the reality of it a lot of times is, you don't care what other people think, you care what you think other people think.
It's not even real.
A lot of times, they don't even think those things about you. So it's 100%. Not even real. Do the thing.
Yeah, man, it really is
do
just that simple
the thing.
Sometimes. Or you think that what you truly want to do is not a worthy enough goal because of that reason.
Yeah.
And you think, well, I can't do that because that's lame. Or like, oh, but like Jimmy over here is doing this and or like my brother's doing this, my uncle's doing this or that or whatever. It's like, okay, that's cool, but like, what are you doing? It's like, well, I have to do something similar, something that other people will approve of, or something that I think is worthy within the context of society.
Yeah.
And this is a trap. Like, I definitely fall into this too sometimes, where you got to figure out, like, well, okay, if my talents and capacities are at a certain level, what goal is worthy of that, and what goal are my talents worthy of as well? Because in some sense there is a case to be made of, well, it is a waste to not use your talents. To an extent, but also just what do you want to do?
Yeah.
Like,
well, because if you don't, like, that will eat at you forever.
Right, because you're pulling in two different directions. You're misaligned, right? Because you want to do one thing, but you think you should do another thing. You need to bring those on the same side, one way or the other.
Well, this is kind of where the idea of like ikigai comes in.
100%, man.
Right?
Ikigai is a fundamental concept. I think that's very underrated, and it's a shame that more people aren't brought aware of that, especially in like traditional Western education. They're not even considering some of the aspects of ikigai that are super duper important.
So what is ikigai?
So ikigai is an overlap. It's like this Venn diagram, if you will, of 4 different categories of going through. Ikigai in and of itself means really like your life person, like your reason for being, right? Like what you're put on this earth to do, really fundamentally. And it's a combination of what you love, what you're good at, what the world needs, and what you can get paid for. right? And it acknowledges the importance of all of those things on equal footing. I think that's the fallacy of a lot of Western education is it might cover them all. It might give you more than one of the other ones, but it overly values things like what the world needs and what you're gonna get paid for, and then a little bit of like what you're good at. That is also out there too, but it hardly ever cares about what you love to do, which is a shame because that's like the turbocharge on all of the other aspects as well.
Dude,
that's like that's sometimes your highest leverage state of being is doing what you're obsessed with, because it's so hard to outcompete someone who loves something more than you.
They're just going to keep doing it. You have to grind through it, and they're just going to do it because they love it.
That's play. It's play for them, yeah. And this is why like talent doesn't really matter nearly as much as like just true obsession and conviction and just absolutely just deciding to make something happen. Like the difference between like baseline, like 0 and talent is nothing compared to the difference between talent and great. Right? So like even if you're talented, you still have to go a long way to go great. But so does someone starting from 0. It's just a little bit further to get up to the talent, quote unquote, level.
Talent is a lever that you're already born with, but it does not mean that that's the only lever. Mm-hmm. Like, there's so many other things.
100%. So finding your ikigai is like really zeroing in and calibrating in on being in authentic alignment to your highest leverage state of being. Yeah,
that makes decision making a whole lot easier because it becomes a huge filter for your life, right? Of like, what you love, so it's something that you really love, and what you're good at, which a lot of times can be very similar because it goes both ways. You oftentimes like what you're good at because, well, you're good at it, so you like it. But you also end up getting good at what you're passionate about because you're just doing it.
You put in the reps. You put in the necessary reps. And it's so, at the end of the day, it's like most success is just dependent on volume and repetition because that's just what is required to get good at a thing.
Absolutely.
And that's just how the human body is trainable in that way.
If you want to get good at a skill, you got to do the thing. So many people are looking for like other ways around it, like
because you know why they're looking for hacks? You know why they're looking for quick fixes? Because they don't actually love it.
Right.
They're not obsessed with it.
They don't actually like it.
If you're obsessed with it, you're going to figure it out. You don't care about the hacks.
Yeah. Because you don't care about making it easier.
You don't want the outcome. You want the process.
Yes. Dude, that's so big.
It's huge. And so having kind of the interplay between what you love and what you're good at is a huge part as well. But again, it's not sustainable, right? You have to add in the other two interplays of what the world needs and what you can actually make an impact on, right? That's kind of like your output leverage. What can you do? What can you serve? That gives you a ton of fulfillment fundamentally as a human being.
Yeah.
And then also like what you can get paid for, that's another huge aspect of sustainability. And also just a measure of the amount of value you provided, right? Yes. So like a lot of times people will just say like, talk about the money, and then people will automatically make the assumption and jump to the conclusion of like, oh, you just care about money. It's like, well, no. I've gone through all of the ins and outs and the complexities of it, and that's just a conclusion that if I make more money, that means I provided more value, right? You cannot separate those very often, at least for very long. You're going to end up in jail usually if you do. So having those two related is a pretty important thing to understand, because then when you're talking about money, you're really talking about value provided and what the world needs and actually helping things. But if you talk about that, people like you more, which is weird because they're not different, right? And also too is like for a lot of people in the sport of business and the sport of entrepreneurship, money is the scoreboard, right? Yeah. And people are always so supportive of like, oh, I hit a new PR at the gym, or I ran a mile in a new time, a new best time, or oh, LeBron scored a lot of points in the hoop ball game. Yeah, and no one criticizes that. No one says like, LeBron, you got to slow down. You should stop. When is enough enough? They never say that. Very, very rarely do they say that. But as soon as we talk about money, oh, that's enough. You got to slow down, man. Why don't you care about other things? Don't you care about people? And there's this huge disconnect where people just start making assumptions about it. Whereas like, dude, this is my sport. I want to get better at it. The more money I have, that means I'm better at my sport. That's my passion. That's my obsession. That's how I provide value in the world.
Right.
Why are you inhibiting that?
Yeah. And I think it's important to distinguish too, like kind of what you mentioned and ran over quickly of, money can be a metric of how much value you provided, right? Because basically, if I have something, if I can create something or offer a service that you find valuable, that you think will help you, you're going to trade your money for it.
Money
right?
is just an exchange of value. It's a store of energy. Money is just potential energy.
Yes.
That is fundamentally what it is, and we're not going to get into like the economics right now of like what is money? Is a unit of exchange and a metric, or a unit of account, and no, that's like the technical forms of money, and that, yes, it does have to be able to do that, but fundamentally, money is just stored energy.
Yeah.
So if you have a lot of money, that means you have a lot of energy to do things. That is what is required. It is like the general potential energy that is required in society to make things happen.
It's a tool. Money's a tool.
It is 100% a tool.
It's a lever.
It's a
right?
big lever, big hammer.
It's a very strong lever.
Mm-hmm.
And again, just because it's a lever, like this still comes back to the person wielding the lever, right? It's like it's only as good as the person pulling it. And so it's like you can use money for good, you can use money for bad, just like you can use anything for good or bad, right? So just money itself is not like the thing that's good or bad. Right. It's just a
100%.
lever. It's just a lever.
But it is foolish to say that it doesn't matter.
Correct, 100%.
And that is why Ikigai will pull that in as well to really just kind of round out and integrate how things all work in context.
Yes.
To live a fulfilled life. Because that's like fundamentally like the purpose of that Ikigai concept is fulfilling your highest potential and doing what you're put on this earth to do.
Yep.
Fulfilling your purpose, right?
Totally. And I do like the concept of what the world needs, because I think that's a hugely impactful and necessary piece of that. There are other similar frames of reference that don't include that, and I think it's important because, and this becomes a philosophical discussion of like what is the purpose of people being on this earth and whatever. But you're pretty much never going to go wrong if you do things that help other people.
Right. Because there is value in that, and people will also give you value, whether that's in money or just also by helping you. Humanity is a naturally reciprocative species.
Totally.
Right? Like that's just how the universe works in the way we've been positioned. So figuring out what you can do that the world needs is very related to why you're here, because you're put here at a certain time in space, at a certain location, and no matter how you ended up getting there, whether or not externally God put you there, you chose to be here, someone else chose, no matter how you spin it, how your soul ended up here at this time in this body in this capacity, all of those things are related to why you're here, right? Yes. And then you need to have, the money to be able to do what you're put here to do. You need the direction of what the world needs. You need the drive and the obsession of what you're good at and what you love to do to get you through the growth period to actually get to the point of greatness where you can actually make the change. Yeah. Right? It's all interrelated and all part of the process of growth and becoming of who you're meant to be and who you can become.
Well, I like the Ikigai thing so much. It resonates. Resonates with me a lot anyway.
It also comes up a lot too in other aspects, which is why it reinforces that it's kind of fundamental what we're talking about. Have you read this book called Good to Great?
Yeah, I have.
Okay, awesome.
I think you recommended it to me.
I did. Good thing you read it. For sure. So in that book, there's this idea, because a little synopsis of the book, it's just going through a pretty rigorous academic explanation of different companies compared to other companies that were at a similar point when they started measuring these companies. And then over time, they tracked which ones outperformed and became great companies from just a mediocre point, and which companies just kind of stagnated to the wayside, right? So it's just all this idea of becoming great from a point of already established mediocrity, right? It's not the point of starting. It's not the point of already being great, or how do you leverage that or whatever. It's like, no, it's just your sustained mediocrity and what changed with certain companies versus others in a very, very similar spot to make one outperform and become great versus the others that were just stagnated, right?
Yeah.
So, and a lot of it came down to this this concept called the hedgehog concept for each of the companies, right? And I'm just going to make sure I get all these right. But it's a similar thing with the Ikigai of it's a Venn diagram type overlap between a few things. And it's very, very similar. Like there's 3 of them in this one instead of 2 of them 4 of them with the Ikigai thing. but it has elements of passion. So like one of them is like, what are you deeply passionate about, right? So that is acknowledgement of the fundamental requirement of passion to become obsessed with something to the point where you'll put in the reps to be good enough to make an impact, right?
Sure.
And then the other one is, what can you be the best in the world at, right? So it's kind of just playing the games where you have an unfair advantage, right? To be able to be great, right? Because at the end of the day, the world doesn't need another mediocre type of business where you're just going to be, like you're just no. The world doesn't need more mediocrity.
It doesn't need like just a low-level Amazon.
It doesn't, right?
Amazon
Because
always serves that
one's going to
purpose
use
at a
that,
higher
right?
level.
You want to be the best in the world, not just as for the health of your business, right? But also just from a purpose perspective. Is the market will generally choose the best option disproportionately, right? So if you're not first, you're kind of like pushed off to the wayside because no one's going to choose a product that's second best. Very rarely they will, right? Maybe for them it's a little bit different or whatever, but you have to distinguish yourself and become unique enough to where you have a specialized value proposition that you can actually be the best in the world at, right? And then the third thing is, this is more tactical, but it's still very, very fundamental to understanding how you make your purpose work, not just finding what that is what drives your economic engine. So this is from the hedgehog concept. And that idea is like amount of profit in dollars per what, right? So what is that main lever, the main thing, the big boulders in your business that that you have to change, or adding more, taking more of these away will give you the most outsized returns, right? So like if it's like dollars per customer or dollars per store or dollars per innovations that you're, or whatever that metric is that you figure out within your company, that's what you need to focus on, right? Because if you can understand like, oh, I get like X amount of dollars per this, you either make that more efficient or you just do more of that thing and then you just end up steamrolling from there, right? So you have this intersection of what you're the best in the world at, understanding how you're actually going to make it happen with your economic engine drivers, and then what are you deeply passionate about to be able to get that done. And it's very, very similar with this Ikigai concept. And I actually find it super cool that they ended up with pretty much the same conclusion from a very tactical academic business perspective. Literally, like these guys are like hardcore like scientists, basically, economists and business people trying to figure this out. And they came with the same concept that's been in like Japanese philosophy for thousands of years.
Yeah. Well, because the cool thing, like when multiple people come to the same conclusion from different perspectives, it's like that's usually a sign that it's more or less a principle or something that really applies across the board.
It's when you reach the same peak taking different paths, right? You end up at the same destination taking different roads. And I see this a lot. Like there's so many more examples we could get into with just how that happens. And you end up just kind of seeing these patterns and connecting these dots all over the place and extrapolating those fundamental core principles that you've abstracted from just endless examples from different walks of life. And it's like, oh, these are the things. And then from that, I can achieve anything by consequence.
Totally. Well,
that was a lot. I think we covered a lot of good stuff today.
I think we got to get out of here.
We do got to get out of here. We got to jet.